X, Y, Z. The three lines of the axis that brought the three dimensions to the Pokemon world, but at the same time, different worlds, which when crossed unleashed the magic of connections. I must confess that I have never been a big fan of Mega Evolutions. Of course they are and look very powerful, but I have always seen them like just that. Fancier and cooler versions of the original Pokemon with nothing clear to guide their designs, and certainly far from the layers of depth behind the regional forms, the dark implications of Paradox Pokemon, or even from the performance and small stories of some Gigantamax. But is it really like that? Here we go again, ready to challenge our convictions and get an interesting reading out of these beloved forms, which may make me rethink the vision I had of them. 48 Mega Evolutions? Seriously? This is going to be long, so grab something to eat and let Mega Energy invade your body. Because Mega Evolution is still a big mystery. The game tells us about how it all began with the impact of the ultimate weapon on certain minerals on Earth, making Megastones appear, objects that irradiate overwhelming power, but hide mysteries that we can't even imagine, and actually seem more complex than that. Let's start from the beginning, following the Pokédex. Mega Venusaur makes very clear the intent behind these forms. The energy irradiated by the stone seems to have an affinity for the Pokemon's most predominant body part or trait. In Venusaur's case, it's flower, used to absorb natural sunlight, and it grows in an exaggerated and aberrant manner when irradiated from an unstable and artificial source such as the Megastone. That growth increases all the skills associated with the flower, producing a lot more sap, obtaining a much better distribution of nutrients throughout its body, and increasing its metabolism and power in general, thanks to which Venusaur is also able to thermoregulate much more effectively, withstanding extreme temperatures. That's the origin of its ability, Thick Fat, which nullifies its weaknesses to ice and fire, although it could also be interpreted as simply being warmer and at the same time more in the shade. A plant on steroids, which of course must pay the toll. The excessive dripping of sap will inevitably lead to diseases, and the acceleration of all its vital processes prolonged over time would produce excessive burnout that will devastate the Pokemon's body in the long run. Blastoise. There's not much mystery about it. You have to accept from now on that many of these forms are going to be the same Pokemon but more flashy. Once again, the most characteristic feature of this Pokemon was its resemblance to a war tank, and the energy of Mega Evolution seems to somehow upgrade it to a more current and efficient model. Its more robust body allows it to better withstand the recoil of its weapons, and the cannons previously on its back are transferred to its arms, which can now withstand that impact and allow it to shoot with much more precision. But if its power we're talking about, a new cannon emerges from its shell, of a much greater power that the Pokemon can now stand to blast. In a way, these are changes that this Pokemon could have experienced over thousands of years of brutal evolution, compressed into a few seconds. A true denial of nature that many of these forms propose. Moving on to more interesting things, there's Charizard. We all know the real reason it was the only one of the three to receive 2 Mega Evolutions, to please the fans of the most popular Pokemon. But what if that story had also happened in the Pokemon world? What if Charizardite Y was its original Megastone, created by the impact of the ultimate weapon like the rest, triggering a relatively natural Mega Evolution of the Pokemon, while X was an artificial stone created in a laboratory? Mega Charizard Y is a relatively logical continuation of the line, exploiting the Pokemon's solar power already present in it from the beginning, and now developed to the point of being able to manipulate the weather. But as the Pokemon with the largest crowd of fans around the world, it wouldn't be surprising if one of them was a prodigious scientist and was disappointed by this conservative form trying to manifest their perfect ideal for their favorite Pokemon. And so he would create a stone that would cause much more extreme and painful changes for the Pokemon, turning it into a dragon as all fans have fantasized about, and giving it the ebony tone of its shiny version, which also keeps fans of the species awake at night. The impressive and edgy blue flames add the final touch that makes it the wet dream or fire dream of everyone who chose Charmander in their day. Unfortunately, this is just a homegrown theory. There's no mention in the games of something like that. But there is another similar case that in a way reinforces our hypothesis. We'll see that in a while. So for now, and leaving Pokédex order aside, we have Mega Banette. Being the original Pokemon, the product of the grudge of an abandoned plush doll, it's kinda illogical how its Mega form, which is supposedly born out of the bond with a trainer who does value it, and consequently a chance to show redemption and even momentary peace, further worsens its situation. Mega Evolution once again chooses the most predominant trait of the Pokemon, in this case its deep hatred and resentment, which is increased and becomes uncontrollable, causing the cursing power that was held back by its zipper to spill out. Against popular belief, Banette is a surprisingly calm and loyal to its trainer Pokemon. That supposed origin of an abandoned doll that became a Pokemon is probably nothing more than a famous horror story inspired by its terrifying appearance. The real reason for the hatred that Banette harbors is that since it was a little Shapet, it has been feeding on negativity that somehow remains inside it, even after evolving. But Banette is able to control it until it acquires this infamous form, and that's the moment where it loses control, becoming wild and vindictive even with its trainer. A dark story that, interestingly, would reflect how Mega Evolution really works. Mega Energy seems to empower Pokemon in the most efficient and quick way, but it does not consider the consequences that this may bring. Mawile is a mysterious Pokemon inspired by Futakuchiona, a woman who didn't feed her children properly and was then cursed, growing a horrifying second mouth that demands food and torments her. But in the Pokemon's case, it's not a real mouth, but its horns, forming a steel jaw that's not connected to its digestive system. It lures the opponent with its charming look from the front to attack it by surprise with that horrible limb. This Pokemon inhabits places like Cave of Origin and Granite Cave as its counterpart Sableye, which feeds on the rich minerals of the area. So perhaps it has the same diet, and those ores are processed in the formation of its jaw. In its Mega Evolution, it absorbs the energy, growing a second jaw that makes it look like two twin tails, and it also has a fancier Hakama now. It makes more sense than it seems, as these features help Mawile look even more innocent and sweet, attracting more prey that it destroys even more easily by having two more powerful mouths. Once again, its two most important features are amplified. It's cuter than ever, but hides an even worse danger in its back. You may have noticed that I am putting quite a lot of emphasis on how these forms would perform in the wild, when it's not clear if they can be found there. In some trailers and promotional content, we do see them free in this form, but in the game a trainer is a must, so the series is quite ambiguous with that. Either way, Mega Evolution compresses what would be thousands of years exposed to threats in the wild in a flash, so I think this logic makes a lot of sense. Its counterpart, Sableye, is a scary Pokemon that feeds on gemstone crystals, which like Mawile affects its organism. The gemstone in its chest absorbs all the energy after Mega evolving, ripping out of its body and acting as a magical crystal-like shield for the Pokemon. This amplifies its magical properties, making this being invulnerable to many spells, embodied in the game in its magic bounce ability that reflects certain status moves. Its artworks also show how the Pokemon observes through the gem, so we can theorize that it also functions as a kind of magical magnifying lens that allows it to see things that others do not see. This is how another of its characteristic traits is amplified, since Sableye is a Pokemon with great eyesight, and this form can also be based on the typical image of the jeweler analyzing their work with a monocle. Audino is a Pokemon of overwhelming kindness that travels around Unova healing injured wild Pokemon. Mega Audino makes this idea a lot more obvious, looking like a doctor, perhaps one from centuries past. It looks great to me, it doesn't have any over-the-top changes, and I always wondered why it's probably the least liked Mega Evolution. Its antennae are now seen much more clearly as a stethoscope, which it uses apparently not only to perceive the health of the Pokemon, but also their feelings and emotions, appeasing turf wars and becoming a Pokemon with great leadership. Mega Aerodactyl introduces a lot of very interesting ideas and is the most vivid image that not everything is so beautiful in Mega Evolution. Some researchers claim that this version resembles the original appearance of this Pokemon that inhabited prehistoric times and was weakened in the process of resurrecting the fossil. We see how that dormant prehistoric power reawakens in an artificial and extremely painful way for the Pokemon. Its skeleton develops in an aberrant way, becoming spears that pierce its skin and joints, points, making them visible from the outside and causing the Pokémon to go mad with pain. This again raises the question, how does Mega Evolution, a phenomenon that should arise from the bond of friendship between humans and Pokémon, make the latter suffer so horribly? To the point of tearing its body apart and making it lose control from the pain? Could it be that Aerodactyl accepts that pain for the love of its trainer? Or that all the stories of friendship are simply lies and hypocrisy from the Pokémon world? Gyarados also suffers a great burden from receiving the energy from Mega Evolution, which this time goes to its brain, disinhibiting and making the little self-control it had left disappear. Its Mega is a completely irrational being, only its primal instinct to burn everything to ashes remains. It's an uncontrollable force being assigned the Dark type by humans for the unfortunate episodes of mass destruction that this monster has caused. It's curious how the Pokédex clarifies that if the bond is strong enough with its trainer, it can obey their orders despite its lack of control, as we see with Misty in the anime. She and this Pokémon have a long history of similar episodes and hard times that have led them to understand each other well enough to make it possible. Curiously, it's also the most powerful Pokémon of Lysandra, raising again the shadow of doubt that friendship is so important to reach this state when a despicable being like him has access to Mega Evolution. Besides that inhibition of its consciousness, for practical purposes, the energy is distributed evenly, making it more powerful in general, but it stands out that its body becomes more similar to Magikarp, losing its flying type. Is it another clue that points to that story of Mega Evolution awakening the primal power of a species? After all, it's nothing new that the series points to Magikarp as a pathetic descendant of a once fearsome creature. Alakazam is affected by Mega Evolution in a very surprising way. The energy overload seems to somehow disrupt its metabolism. It speeds up, but instead of strengthening its body, it causes practically all the energy to go to its brain, losing its already scarce physical strength and vitality. In Mega Alakazam's design, it's clear how its muscle mass decreases. Its skin tone pales, and it grows a long beard, all signs of accelerated and sudden aging. Of course, this is not in exchange for anything. Its supernatural intelligence becomes something unimaginable, being able to read in an instant all the opponent's movements to anticipate everything. An intelligence that, seen from the outside, would be magic, as in fact it takes on the appearance of a wizard, one who sold its soul to be able to eat ice cream with 5 spoons at the same time. There are many more details in this design, such as its visual and conceptual similarity to a Hindu ascetic, but we aren't even halfway through the 48 form, so let's accept that there are details that we are going to overlook in a video like this. Gengar is another special striker of the first generation, so in its Mega Evolution, it also accumulates energy in its brain, manifesting it in one of the most interesting forms. All its entries talk about how the energy accentuated its evil, going from a mischievous and slightly malicious ghost to a real walking curse. Its cruelty is such that Gengar is only capable of establishing emotional bonds with the prey it is stalking. There is not a single well-intentioned feeling left in it. Its eagerness to cause as much suffering as possible is such that it has awakened the ability Shadow Tag, which makes it impossible for its rival to escape its perpetual evil eye. But why? What is the origin of that evil? Well, once again, it turns out that Mega Evolution affected its mind. Ghastly was born as the gaseous incarnation of souls that didn't find peace, but despite that, in their normal form, they are capable of feeling love and happiness. However, Mega Evolution, with its known and bloody origin, seems to be a dark energy with an affinity to provoke negative emotions and thoughts, affecting the mind as we saw with Gyarados and others. When interacting with beings that tend to malicious acts, this would be enhanced by releasing an unseen evil of overwhelming power, the original form of that energy. Medicham is a Pokemon that, through meditation and extreme practices, can connect with itself like few others in the world. But in its Mega form, it would rise to such a state of enlightenment that it would directly materialize 4 extra arms, as an incarnation of the goddess Shiva. The shape of its head is reminiscent of a Hindu turban, reinforcing this origin. Mega Manectric is somewhat predictable. The energy mixes with its already exaggerated static, going from having its characteristic spike-shaped fur to directly making a bolt of lightning with the shapes of its body. This is more electricity than Manectric is capable of handling, putting it in a bad mood and making it much more irascible and aggressive. That's why it has Intimidate as its new ability. Mega Kangaskhan is the favorite form of Ken Sugimori because it represents his ideal when making a design, representing and conveying an idea, in this case the enormous power of Mega Evolution, through changes as subtle and simple as possible. So simple that we were all able to understand it since we saw it for the first time. The energy is concentrated in the suddenly growing baby. Kangaskhan's maternal instinct makes it understand that the time of their separation is near, deciding to let it out of the pouch from time to start learning, fighting, and fending for itself. But the baby is a beginner, and having developed quickly without getting used to this power makes it emboldened and act recklessly, which worries the mother a lot. Obviously, its ability is the materialization of those training sessions. First, the mother strikes to show the baby how it's done, and then, in the same turn, and with somewhat less power and expertise, the baby imitates the move. So, the disturbing and unnatural character of Mega Evolution continues here. Because when leaving this state, growth is reversed, which is clearly not healthy for a baby. And it's also cruel for the mother who puts the safety of its offspring first and foremost. Mega Ampharos joined forces with the endless memes about Pokemon that should or should not be Dragon type. At this point, Game Freak making this type of crazy design seem on purpose. But the truth is that this one is actually pretty clever and justified. First, the game explains how excess energy combined with the Pokemon's electrical charge triggers a reaction so powerful that it awakens its long-sleeping dragon's blood. Something that may catch many by surprise. What does a sheep have to do genetically with a dragon? Well, let's take a closer look. Doesn't Ampharos look more like a small dragon than an ovine? Don't Mareep and Flaffy do too if we remove the woolly fur from their bodies? Indeed, this line has been close to dragons all this time, but the capricious ways of evolution made it develop wool and go unnoticed. The clues have always been there. They can learn dragon-type moves, and the original Japanese name of Ampharos, literally translated as electric current, can also be read as electric dragon. There have also been rumors that its beta form was dragon-type, but with the release of the gold and silver beta editions, we saw that it was not true, that draconian blood was deliberately hidden, with clues here and there, to make a triumphal entry years later. Wait, are those Dragon Balls and the flying Nimbus? Well played. Going back to Mega Evolution, awakening the dormant DNA of the most powerful beings in the world would be a major cheat, so it's a more natural power-up than it seems. Its main is simply the result of the cellular instability that this metamorphosis entails, with hair growth lost to evolution as a side effect, although it could also be based on the benevolent white-haired dragon so typical of many stories around the world. Now look at Mega Scizor. If it comes to suffering, the game tells us about how its body begins to melt after too long in this form. Scizor already had a kind of robotic body, accelerating its metabolism with evolution to maintain its high performance just as a machine would increase its revolutions. The excess energy from Mega Evolution would further enhance that metal coat, but in return, and to withstand the additional burden, it would need to accelerate its metabolism even more, to the point of significantly increasing its body temperature. That's why the Pokédex emphasizes the danger of this form with its quadruple weakness to fire. The overheating that comes with its Mega Evolution is especially cruel, to the point that its body becomes a cauldron that over time begins to melt, causing the inner bug to agonize. Maybe its wings could act as a fan to try to cope with it a little better? Abomasnow shares that weakness to fire, although luckily, its Mega Evolution doesn't seem to have a warming effect. It's one of the most mysterious forms, and we hardly have information on how this process affects Abomasnow. We don't see any major changes. The Pokédex is brief about it, and even its ability is the same. This could be because it's a barely studied and mysterious species. Inspired by the Yeti, it lives in isolated mountains of perpetual winter. With its snow warning ability, Abomasnow causes this eternal winter, implying that it's a Pokemon that avoids contact with others. Mega Evolution energy spreads all over its body and gives it an even more savage and beast-like appearance, perhaps becoming a primal version of it like some others. One would expect it to be even less used to human presence, so there is a certain cruelty implicit in the fact that the process needs a trainer to take place. but if one had to choose a mega form with a wild and terrifying appearance, Pinsir would be a clear candidate. Huge wings grow on its back, its pincers sprout frightening spikes, and its eyes abandon any hint of kindness from its original form to become unpredictable and merciless. I'm convinced that all these traits were given to one of the most intimidating bugs in the region to make it the living embodiment of insect phobia. The biggest nightmare for a trainer afraid of bug types, empowering all those aberrant traits and fears ingrained in our minds. The absolute counterpart of Heracross. As a bug, it's one of the kindest, calmest, and most peaceful Pokemon, close to some kind of heroism with its fighting type, which incidentally, Pinsir destroys with its new flying type. Continuing with the theory that Mega Evolution is sometimes a Darwinian evolution compressed in a few seconds, it makes some sense that their types have adapted to their biggest rival and competitor in current times. Mega Heracross accumulates this formidable energy to become much bulkier, but overloads its body to the point of being immobile for days due to the soreness in its muscles. If in normal conditions it's a friendly Pokemon with others, a nature probably derived from the few threats Heracross has as a Pokemon that feeds on honey without bothering anyone, and with an enormous strength that makes not a good idea to mess with it. In its mega form, it would become a hero, as it could not be otherwise inspired by the Hercules beetle. Pidgeot is a curious bird with notable divine traits very similar to the Egyptian deities Horus and Ra. After Mega evolving, these sacral features are accentuated to become much more evident. Even its two most characteristic moves become Hurricane and Heat Wave, representing in a perhaps casual but very accurate way the sky and the sun that this duo of deities symbolized, and of course the flying type itself. It comes to show the progression from a little bird that any novice trainer can catch to a whole sky god. The energy of Mega Evolution increases its muscular capacity, making its crest grow to resemble the ceremonial crowns with which these deities were represented, giving Pidgeot greater flying balance and increasing its speed, the power of its wind gusts, and the amount of time it can soar the skies. This is another case in which Mega Energy seems to affect Pokemon more benignly, with no references for now to major harmful effects that it experiences on this transformation. Is there any chance that those divine traits that the line somehow pointed to actually protect the Pokemon from the negative effects of Mega Evolution? Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire were in full development when Twitch Plays Pokemon was a rage on the internet, so I wouldn't dismiss this line being a tribute to the rebirth of a canonically divine Pokemon. Mega Slowbro is the most visually obvious form. The energy of Mega Evolution gathers on the Shelder biting its tail, with the host Slowpoke remaining virtually unchanged, but its stats say otherwise. However, if the only change was the overgrowth of Shelder to become an armor, shouldn't it only increase its defense? Well, to understand this one, we must go back to the general mechanics of its line. The toxins that the hungry mollusk secretes affect Slowpoke, stimulating its nervous system and developing its intelligence by biting Slowking's head and anesthetizing it by biting Slowbro's tail. In Mega Slowbro, Shelder grows so big that it nibbles its entire body, so perhaps it has both effects at the same time. Of course, judging by its artwork, the gesture of the drawing, and its expression, the Pokemon is more uncomfortable and worried than ever, so the stats modifier comes at a high price. Perhaps if it stays in that form too long, it will accumulate more toxicity than it's capable of enduring. A power that brings with it a very visual torture. The design is even reminiscent of an Iron Maiden. Perhaps similar to it, the parasitic Shelder has developed a multitude of inner spikes not visible from the outside, which inject all those toxins, dodging vital points so as not to kill the host, but not giving it a good time. But speaking of suffering, Houndoom has arrived. In the most characteristic trait of the base Pokemon which Mega Energy could have chosen, we already find the hellish air that the evolution exaggerates. It's often said that Houndoom was inspired by Cerberus, the three-headed dog of Hades. But with only one head, it seems to represent a breed of dog that adapted to live in hell more than anything. Like all its inhabitants, it would be forced to suffer its penance, having the Pokemon an internal fire that causes it enormous pain, forcing it to constantly release the heat in powerful, spontaneous flares. This makes Houndoom to be seen as a violent and aggressive being, but this behavior comes more from its inner suffering than from an evil or malignant nature as such, since even in its base form, its skin is pierced by its own bones. The suffering that we see implicit in it in many forms seems curiously to be an attribute of Mega Evolutions. The energy, as expected, would be directed at enhancing that agony. Houndoom is further crushed by its own skeleton that met overgrowths to make it look like the face of a demon. Its tail comes to look like the whip of Hades, as if it constantly whips itself by the mere fact of existing. And its inner fire reaches the point of melting its skin and nails, driving Houndoom mad without any mercy left. And to think that I used this form on one of the Pokemon I've been most fond of, I deserve a punishment. Perhaps by one of the hands of Mega Metagross, which unlike the other forms, doesn't directly increase its power. Just as Steven is a specialist of past and future, Metagross seems to represent a venerable being, both ancient and futuristic at the same time. An archaic bronze giant that at the same time functions as a supercomputer light years ahead of what today's technology allows, at least ahead of the moment I'm writing the script. There is an apocalyptic air surrounding the Pokemon that in its mega form materializes into a species that threatens to exterminate every living thing. This time, the energy makes Metagross capable of unleashing 100% of the power of its 4 brains, which gives it such unimaginable faculties that it would have a completely different perception of reality. The Pokédex says that it's a ruthless Pokemon that will clutch at any means of ensuring its victories. Everything that happens around it is nothing more than meaningless interactions, so it's a mystery why Metagross does not rebel against its trainer and subdue everyone. Maybe life and the bond between people has something that no algorithm can decipher and keeps it bound to the one who trusted it as a silly little beldam. Gardevoir is another Pokemon with a powerful bond with its trainer for the same reasons. Starting as a helpless and weak Ralts, it keeps in its heart the feelings of the trainer who gives his trust and takes good care of it. This is amplified by the fact that since childhood, it perfectly reads the true feelings of people and Pokemon. As Gardevoir, it acquires an enormous power that it uses to reward those who trust it, giving its life if necessary. As it could not be otherwise, Mega Evolution reinforces those feelings, getting to acquire Gardevoir a white dress similar to a bridal gown, which would symbolize an unbreakable bond that in its shiny form takes black tones of mourning, one that will last forever and not even death will be able to break. An idea straight out of a fairy tale, like the fairy type that this form represents in its ability and takes to the bitter end. Gallade would keep a similar idea, but by a different path. For the same reasons, it would develop an unwavering loyalty to its trainer, this time manifested in a martial path close to a knight who swears loyalty to its monarch, focusing on fighting and the arts of swordsmanship. Mega Evolution also highlights its psychic power, which would unlock a mental ability that allows it to use a two-sword style, with its arms acquiring a red aura that makes its swords much more deadly and helps Gallade to perfect its style at last. The two of them together are like a bloody wedding, fairy tale that ends in tragedy. Actually, no, but they seem to symbolize a kind of duality that their paradox was able to exploit, trying to merge and amplify their most predominant traits, like their mega forms, to create the most powerful psychic Pokemon, even if it ended in failure. Tyranitar suffers once again the consequences of this powerful energy in its body. Its back is completely split open by its skeleton, making it even more violent than usual, giving it the final form of a terrible kaiju, and being most likely based on Space Godzilla. A terrible being whose back also sprouted 2 huge spikes, and the belly that maintained the structure of when it was a Pupitar in its normal form seems to have evolved into something similar to a screaming Tyranitar. Combine that with the rear spikes and I can more or less see it, although it could simply represent a demonic face in agony, which is quite fitting considering the original Godzilla was born as the embodiment of the suffering caused by nuclear bombs. Aggron watches over the mountains it takes as its territory and shows no mercy to those who threaten its peace. Its new ability filter further mitigates its weaknesses and accentuates that defensive nature. It's a walking fortress, and its tail now resembles not only Laren's back, but a digging machine, which in addition to increasing its offensive power, considerably could point to its design being based on mining and the process of filtering precious metals from the rock, which explains its change of type. Absol acquires with the power of Mega Evolution an intimidating aura that makes faint-hearted people expire from shock at the sight of it. Once again, this is an exaggeration of Absol itself, a peaceful and kind creature who, with its mystic senses, leaves its solitary shelter and appears in front of people prior to misfortunes and catastrophes to warn them of impending dangers, even knowing that it will be misunderstood because they believe that it's the Pokemon itself that brings misfortune and causes those disasters. This trait adds added to the changes in its appearance, makes it possible that this line and form may have been inspired by angels. However, not in their more common image, but in the so-called biblically accurate angels, such as the ancient representations of seraphim, cherubim, and thrones. Extremely ominous and disturbing beings that visually would have caused a reaction similar to the one narrated for this Pokemon. However, like Absol, they are entirely pure and benevolent beings. So it would go very much in line with the game of misunderstanding and superficiality that this Pokemon portrays. Mega Garchomp is not such a benevolent soul, acquiring sharp blades on its arms, a visible skeleton, and a murderous wild look. It seems to be the spitting image of a serial killer. Of course, in the Pokemon world. Cynthia is the opponent in the series that comes closest to being a team killer, so perhaps the stories of fans succumbing to her Garchomp inspired this design and the way Mega Evolution energy would affect it. Once again, its new form seems to be aimed at accenting the terror that this already intimidating Pokemon generates in others. Its relative Sharpedo follows a similar path, and being biologically very close Pokemon that are even speculated to have a common ancestor, it makes sense that the energy would affect them in similar ways. Sharpedo is based on the very popular Japanese trope of the sea monster full of scars from its fights. Mega energy would make the scars of these fights resurface, reminding Sharpedo of the pain it thought it had already overcome. This added to the fact that, just like Aerodactyl, its spiny bones get out of control and go through sections of its body, making Sharpedo a being of extreme aggressiveness, which now represents a genuine terror under the sea. Its design could be inspired by the sawfish, a curiously peaceful animal that rarely attacks people unless it's provoked or feels threatened. This could be the case of Mega Sharpedo, which feels such enormous pain when exposed to that pressure that it goes berserk. Two designs of species close to sharks that seem to emphasize the terror they generate because, after all, the shark itself is one of the elements behind the most irrational fear and a common trope of horror films. Lucario, as it could not be otherwise, channels all the Mega energy into its aura, to the point that it loses the control over it that used to be one of its traits, becoming more powerful but much more violent. Mega Lucario overflows with energy, but doesn't have good control of it, which makes it tend to opt for a more brutal and frontal combat style. Visually, it would follow this line, turning its divine inspirations into something closer to Seth, the Egyptian deity of violence and disorder. Lopunny has started going to the gym, and what else can be said? Literally, the pattern of its legs looks like ripped pantyhose, and its movements, rather than martial arts, are similar to what you would see in an aerobics or Zumba class. Comparing it with the intentionally innocent and tender pose of the original, it seems that they wanted to represent a certain duality with Mega Lopunny. Even its ears now simulate pigtails that would be more comfortable to train with, and with its ability, Mega Lopunny can beat up ghosts with normal and fighting type moves, which will come in handy in the gym, of course. It still doesn't convince me a lot, but it doesn't matter because it's time for my favorite Mega Evolution, and for me, the best example of these forms. Beedrill. Not only for being the most natural design while still being ingenious, but also for rescuing a Pokemon that really needed something like this. Its design is quite simple, combining the beetle wasp it's inspired by with a pair of lances, because the main idea behind this design is to sting and drill. And what is the most recurrent reasoning behind this type of attack? The smaller the surface you concentrate the attack, the more effectiveness will increase. The energy of Mega Evolution modifies the structure of the Pokemon so that its legs become stingers, and its abdomen generates spaces to unify all these limbs into one and attack with all its harpoons in unison. Simple, natural, and a lot of fun to use in battles. Perfect! The original Steelix is inspired by the formation of diamond being generated from onyx carbon subjected to extreme pressure and temperature. Its Mega Evolution seems to continue to develop that diamond into a fantastic mineral, even harder and more beautiful. An element that is not found in any other Pokemon or part of the world, so tenacious that it manages to crack its diamond body so far impenetrable, letting itself be seen from the inside. Wait, fantastic crystalline materials that seem to come out of another world and hexagons everywhere. And on top of that, a divine halo. And doesn't that mouth look like Dialga's crown? We have before us the real Pokemon god? Well, actually, the hexagons represent geodes, and that celestial halo would be the remains of its body that the wonderful material of its core went through and would attract with its magnetism, still suffering the Pokemon in the process. For now, let's get down to business with the Hoenn starters. Sceptile and its entire line are based on the leaf-tailed gecko, with the leaf becoming a small yew tree in its final final form and a pine tree with the energy of Mega Evolution. Or something like that, but it gains control over the fruits that grow on it, being able to fire them as a powerful projectile, a rather ingenious move if we go back to its inspiration in reptiles that are able to shed off their tails to survive. Since trees have the property of attracting lightning easily, Mega Sceptile's ability changes to Lightning Rod, quite harmful for the species, as well as its type change that doesn't benefit it much in battle. And this could be a reference again to an awakening of the latent dragon DNA in the line. Its ability, Swift Swim, the maximum exponent of swimming, a very demanding activity that requires a strong body. Not to mention the breathtaking speeds it reaches underwater, although it's helped by its new ability to store air in the patches of its arms that it uses to propel itself. The line's inspiration from axolotls is somewhat eclipsed by a structure more akin to beasts like the prehistoric Mega Salamander. It would be a crime not to have inspired at least one Pokemon in a species named like that. The last and most exciting Hoenn starter design is Blaziken. The original is an extremely humanized cockfighting chicken. I recently found out about the eerily humanoid Shamo breed that the line was possibly based on in the first place. Following that idea, its Mega Evolution would make it lose that humanization to look much more bird-like. The crest that it lacks in its base form, as it's common practice to pluck it from cockfighting chickens, grows back. Even its features become much more animalistic, like a bird's beak. This form seems to be one of the few benign Mega Evolutions, an idea of liberation from an animal exploited in deadly and bloody battles, to a martial artist who fights and practices for its own growth. A hopeful outcome for a line that was originally much more sinister than it seemed. Mega Camerupt is the embodiment of the eruption of the small volcanoes that the species had as humps. But that M on its forehead, nailed to the symbol of Team Magma, is suspicious. Isn't it much of a coincidence that such an aesthetically convenient way to represent Team Magma was born from the firing of the ultimate weapon? Perhaps we are in front of another artificial Megastone. It's a technologically advanced team that investigates precisely how to expand the landmass, just like volcanoes do, creating new archipelagos. Isn't it a perfect way to symbolize all the research of Team Magma? Namel's line is the most representative of the team in the original editions, so it's not hard to believe that they tried in the universe with Mega Evolution to make the most of it. Altaria is all about innocence and charm. Maybe in the 3D models it's not so evident, but in the sprite era, it pretended to be a little bird trapped in a cloud, a cute and silly idea that would be expanded in its Mega Evolution. It's not a design that stands out for its references, but it conveys very well the way it broke with the standard of the dragon type in its day. Intimidating, ferocious, and destructive beings, all elements that could not be further away from the dove of Peace Pokemon. They even gave Mega Altaria the fairy type to not only break with the dragon stereotype, but literally break the rest of dragons. Now, if we talk about possible inspirations, the ping is a huge bird from Chinese mythology that soars through the sky, shaking its cloud-like wings. Pretty close, right? Pay attention to Gallade because it was hard to get something interesting about it, but in the end, oh mama. It's basically an Oni, but observing the structure of Snorunt, it seems more coherent to think that the black part is its real body, and all the structure around it is a sort of ice mask. It turns out that analyzing it is very similar to precisely an ice hockey mask, which makes a lot of sense given its type. Now, Mega energy seems to go to its jaw area, causing it to crack and sprout lumps similar to a beard. And it turns out that there is a tradition in major hockey leagues of growing a beard during the playoffs, the most important time of the season when players must be at their best, something quite analogous to Mega Evolution. Whether this crazy origin is real or a simple coincidence, the weight gain in the jaw makes Gallade unable to close its mouth, one of the most grotesque images in a Mega Evolution, not even letting it eat normally and like other Mega forms, leaving it irritated. On top of that, it's unable to control the blizzards coming from its insides, which Gallade exhales with more fury and are colder than ever. The enormous similarity of Roaring Moon with Mega Salamence, especially in the shape of its wings, made the theory that Mega Evolution awakens the primal power of certain species resurface again. However, in this one, it seems a little clearer what is happening. The desire to fly guided most of Bagan's thoughts in its childhood, becoming deeply ingrained in its spirit, and causing Mega energy to concentrate on precisely that, its wings. Salamence becomes a being designed to fly. The aerodynamics of its wings making this flight super efficient, even if it's to the detriment of other vital functions. Its ability Aerolate makes even all its normal movements become flying type to further clarify its vital obsessions. Like the paradox, the fact that when it flies over the night sky, it's mistaken for a blood-soaked crescent across the sky could refer to the blood moon, related in various cultures to death and the end of the world, as well as to the classic Chinese poems of the dragon and the moon. Diancie is special for many reasons. It was the only mythical Pokemon to receive a Mega Evolution, and besides that, it's the only Pokemon of the generation in which Mega forms were introduced to reach this state. This beautiful life form is apparently the product of the sudden mutation of a carbine. The reason for such mutation and its strange link with the Mega Evolution it can reach without a trainer is still a mystery. But perhaps it originally arose from one of the impacts of the ultimate weapon on a carbine, being some sort of living megastone. Its ability to generate diamonds out of thin air is one of the most fearsome skills in the world, and this ultimate form is a product of exploiting that power to optimize its own structure for battle, improving its speed and offensive power even if it's at the cost of some defense. Diancie is considered a princess by the rest of carbinks, and its outfit when mega evolving is much more in line with that status, although its form is also very similar to a luxurious chandelier. Latios and Latias are going to be the biggest challenge in the video because it will be hard to see them in a good light. You know, I'm not a fan of what they did with my favorite legendary duo. I think it slaughtered their personality, and that was what I loved most about them, but that doesn't mean that they made them identical without a reason. In fact, there are a lot of them. Although they are really mysterious Pokemon, it's known that they were born at the same time, so they are technically twins, and you know about the special connection of this kind of siblings. If in humans there are cases bordering on the paranormal, of knowing what the other is thinking and how the other is feeling at all times, imagine psychic Pokemon that specialize their power in emotions and dreams. As a duo, they act as if they were one, and Mega Evolution unifies them for good, combining their colors and personalities, which, well seen, have always been quite complementary. The outgoing and sensitive Latias and the serious and bold Latios into a perfect being that embodies the Eon. I've done my best. What do you think? Now comes the moment we were all waiting for. Because there is another Mega Evolution quite different that manifested in two distinct forms. Mewtwo. Known to be a Pokemon that is the product of science, the fact that it also has two Mega forms would reinforce the theory that at least one of Charizard's stones is artificial, since it's not something that has been seen naturally repeated. What does seem very clear is that Mewtwo stones are synthetic. Since it's hard to believe that the day the ultimate weapon was fired, stones suitable for a species that would still take thousands of years to be born were created. The series has confirmed how, in the current Pokemon timeline, more than one Mewtwo was created, so it would not be unreasonable to think that they were developed with different philosophies, and the stones would represent two equally different ethics. Mega Mewtwo Y would be created by a team of scientists who would see Mewtwo as a hope for a better world. Its power boost is mostly focused on its special attack, which we know represents intellect and similarly, research and progress. Its structure is also much more similar to Mew, a Pokemon that contains the DNA of all the world's creatures, so deciphering it could mean curing all diseases and unlocking the potential of humans and Pokemon. It makes sense that their Mewtwo would be closer to that original ideal as we see in its Y form. Having that immature appearance, perhaps it was even involved in research to cure and reverse aging. In the 16th movie, it even goes so far as to acquire this form to reach outer space, breaking its own limits and launching a message of hope, something very symbolic of the spirit with which it would be created. Not to mention that it's a specimen with a much better heart than all those we had seen up to that point. As you might imagine, Mega Mewtwo X would be the other side of the coin. Being created by scientists with much more dire intentions, domination, and power, they would make it a much more efficient killing machine than the original. Mewtwo acquires the fighting type, making it a relentless opponent both physically and mentally. It is somehow the natural evolution of the Mewtwo that we met in the original first generation, whose only thoughts in its mind were to destroy and take revenge. It's a far cry from that intention to mimic the new species Pokemon for the sake of science, and its new ability, Steadfast, points to how any remnant of compassion that might remain in its heart has been completely eliminated. Mega Rayquaza is involved in issues too deep to be dealt with in a video like this one, related to the very origin of this phenomenon. So, with your permission, I'll save it for a near future where we will learn about all the legendaries in the world. It's also a totally different form to all those we have seen that would break too much with the logic and narrative of the video, so I prefer to dedicate a moment to it then. So those have been the 48 manifestations of the mysterious phenomenon we call Mega Evolution, or at least my interpretation of them. Although at the end of the day they are designs that clearly focus on being flashy and stunning whether it was logical or not, they show more intention, traits, and interesting origins than I thought. You can't imagine how much I had to rack my brain for the video, so if you had a nice time and want to see something similar with other mechanics like Gigantamax or Z-moves, give the video a lot of love, and please share it with anyone you think might enjoy it. By now, take a look at other videos on my channel explaining Pokemon in depth, like the one you have on screen about the lovely creatures of Hisui. Be nice.